All of us bring our own perspective to art, and this unique perspective can affect how each of us see it. Ephraim Peleg's work, Three Rings, shows us that the different view at which we look at the piece can make the work seem entirely different. One angle of this piece isn't the whole story. We need to be able to look all around. As you look at this work, how does your perspective change as you start to see more of the piece? Did you envision it differently than you do now? Ephraim Peleg is an Israeli sculptor born in 1936 in Poland. He was originally trained as a painter, however, he found a lot of interest in sculpting after studying in London. He found that the dark and dull London weather made him miss how vibrant Israel was, and he found himself wanting to put more dimension into his work to make it more bright in his eyes. Peleg explains that many of his works were influenced by the fact that his childhood was interrupted by the loss of both of his parents in the Holocaust. He was also influenced by the death of his 19-year-old son in Israel's war with Lebanon in 1982. As these deaths influenced his life, they also started to shape the way he looked at art. Peleg started to create sculptures that symbolize survival and resistance as strength. He wants to show that survivors don't need to be viewed as victims, but rather look at their strength and foundation for a new life. This symbolism started through using repetition and sharply defined forms in his pieces in order to show power. In this piece, Three Rings, I can see the way he uses large and repetitive rings in order to show strength in life. Three Rings is a bronze sculpture that has three circles and all different angles, which makes me think about the different lives these rings represent, and how even though they aren't necessarily touching, how they all still connect with each other. The different ways at which we look at the piece, we can see the rings either going different directions or we are able to look straight through them. We can see this commonality of the three ring-like shapes in different angles at another piece of Peleg's. However, as you can see, they are C-shapes rather than full rings. Looking at the two side by side, we can see the similarities and differences that these two works have. I wonder if the rings show the continuous life and represent eternity, while the C-shape has a break in the middle, showing something's being cut off. When looking closer at Three Rings, I also noticed the shadows that are created by the placement of the rings, how each circle creates a different shadow depending on the time of day. When I went to observe the sculpture, the shadows looked a lot like the Olympic rings. It made me think further about how people are so connected. As the sun moved and different shadows touch, I could see how Peleg is showing us the connection between the survivors and how even though they stand separately, they are still parts of them that can overlap and show commonalities. Ephraim Peleg does a beautiful job of using his past to create art that represents something much more meaningful. He uses sculptures as a tool to spread his belief in the importance and strength of all people to stand up against evil forces, and that this continues to be his inspiration for new works. At first glance, I would have never expected to unpack so much from what I initially saw as just three rings, but Peleg taught us the deeper meaning behind his work and keeps us curious about what these three rings represent.